Previously on Weather the Storm.
Initially, when we started the business, we had this idea that contractors wanted to know what size of hail fell at any one location. And as we continued to have this level of curiosity to understand what it was they were looking for, we began to understand it wasn't necessarily the size of hail that they were interested in. They were relating the size of hail to the amount of damage that the storm did. But when we take our knowledge base on weather, we start to understand that it's not just the size of hail, it's the density of the hail, it's the volume of hail that impacts the roof, it's the age of the roof, it's the amount of insulation, it's the type of shingle that they have. There are so many different variables that come in, and they were taking this one level of golf ball size hail and saying that equals damage. And we began to understand that that's not true. And so we wanted to take as many variables as we could as a weather forensics company. What could we understand about a storm, and could we answer the question that they're asking, which is not what size of hail hit the roof, but did the storm do damage? And then once we answer that question, we get to the next solution that they're looking for, which is there an opportunity for me to help or to replace a roof? When we focus on those two questions, we now have a different direction that we want to go with our software, which is, again, we're looking for roof damage. We're not looking for the opportunity to tell them what size of hail impacted a roof. I'm Derek Klein, CEO of HailTrace. Founded HailTrace back in 2010.
I'm Allie Burt. I'm the executive assistant at HailTrace. I also do all the photo and video stuff.
My name is Frank Gaetano. I've been working for HailTrace for about 8 years now. I'll still go on some chases, either independently or if they invite me on the chases, but for now, sticking to sales, trying to make that commission money. Let's go. So why do I go on all the hurricane chases? Well, there's a little bit of an inside joke that we have here about how I am terrible luck for tornadoes. It's called franking it up. Whenever I show up, tornadoes die. They just don't like me. But when we go to hurricanes, it seems like every hurricane I go to, we get rapid intensification right before landfall. So I'm just a hurricane magnet. I'm good luck for intensifying hurricanes. So that's why they bring me on all the hurricane chases.
Jim Cantori has nothing on Frank.
Man, look at that thing.
And it is really spinning now. This is a pretty scary situation for the Gulf Coast. I'm definitely starting to get worried. This system has just formed this core now, and it's in the Caribbean Sea. It's about to cross the tip of Cuba over the next 24 hours, and it's going to go right into the Gulf of Mexico. And when it gets there, I don't see how it's not going to explode and just become a super, super strong hurricane as it heads somewhere towards the Florida Gulf Coast. Unfortunately for the Gulf Coast, this part of Cuba is very flat, so it won't incur a lot of friction from land as it interacts with land as it crosses Cuba. It'll be a short pass across Cuba, maybe a little hiccup in intensity, and then right back over extreme warm waters in the Gulf of Mexico with no shear for this thing to just intensify as it moves up towards the Florida coast.
So I think Florida's the best option?
Yeah, Florida is definitely going to be the best option. The big question is, will it make landfall in the Panhandle or will it make landfall near Tampa? So we're about a week from Hurricane Ian making landfall, and you start to kind of see this buzz on some of the models. They start poking at the idea that this tropical wave that's out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean is going to form into a hurricane, and there's a potential that it could make it into the Gulf of Mexico. And the Gulf of Mexico is just a breeding ground for intense hurricanes because it gets so warm. That water is just like soup. It's just like a ball of energy for a hurricane to grab hold of it, and they just tend to explode when they get into the Gulf of Mexico. And so as a storm chaser, when I see this, my ears perk up, my eyes perk up, whatever it is, right? I start to get a little bit excited about the potential. And a hurricane chase is a long chase. This is not a, roll out of bed, look at the weather and say, hey, we could drive 3 hours and go see a tornado today. We've got to have gasoline because most of the time there is no gas in the location that we're at, which means there's also no food. So we have to have food that we have that's non-perishable type food that we can eat in an area that we don't have we don't have a refrigerator. There are no air conditioners, like you have no power. We have to have water. There's all of these things that you have to prepare for, all well in advance of the hurricane making landfall. And a lot of times in a situation that you don't know if the hurricane is actually going to even form or make landfall. So it's a very bold forecast. It's very expensive. It's a lot of money. You've got to plan for hotels on the way there. Unfortunately, we drive a Raptor that has a parachute on the front. So when you're driving to a hurricane and you have a headwind into this hail cage that goes over the front, our gas mileage goes down very quickly. So we spend a lot of money in fuel, but then we also have a lot of gas tanks in the back because we're going to need that fuel once we're in the hurricane warning area. 37 gallons in the truck, 15 in the back. A lot of prep really goes into preparing for the idea, and then you have to do the forecast, and the forecast gets really complicated, especially on a Florida hurricane. Florida hurricanes can hit on one side of the peninsula or the other, and it can mean a difference of 8 hours in drive time to get there. And when you're trying to really plan out what time you want to get there and not waste as much time as possible, it can really get complicated as to, is the hurricane going to make landfall in whatever location it's going to make landfall. And with Ian, it was super complicated from the idea that we had a landfall location of anywhere from Tampa, Florida, or even south of Tampa, Fort Myers, all the way up to possibly Destin or Pensacola, or even I think at times it looked like there was a potential that Mobile, Alabama. That's like a 10-hour drive difference, specifically for us. When we looked at driving, it was like a 12-hour drive or a 22-hour drive. Well, if it's a 22-hour drive, we have to leave a day earlier to get there. And what was really interesting is if it made landfall on the 22-hour drive, it was also going to make landfall a day earlier than if it would have made landfall on the 10 hours. So it was actually a 2-day difference on when we had to leave to be able to intercept this hurricane that really hadn't even formed yet. We didn't even know if there would be a hurricane or not. So all this prep work goes into the idea of, okay, well, we need to leave on this date, or we might need to leave on this date.
It's a lot of, prep because, safety is the number one thing for us, obviously, but also, and Derek says this constantly, we do not want to become victims of the storm. We do not want to take up resources that need to go to somebody else that lives there and their home and their lives are impacted. So a lot of what I'm doing is like the food prep and, helping to find hotels and just making sure that we have everything that we need to be successful and to stay safe. Thankfully, we have not encountered a hurricane chase yet that I've been on where we've gotten stuck, but we do talk about that, hey, we could be in this parking garage if storm surge comes in and we could be stuck for a day or two. Like, we need to be prepared, to ride it out, safely and have food and water and everything. The other thing to mentally prepare for is you're not always have access to a bathroom. So maybe TMI, but we have definitely peed in corners of parking garages. So it's just a thing you kind of have to deal with, unfortunately, but that's all a part of the experience. But for me, I'm obviously getting all of my photo stuff ready and they're looking at the storms. And another big part of it is like on the way down, Derek or Frank or whoever is with us, they're looking at safe places.
Have a plan for what would you do if the wind was blowing 150 miles an hour and you were stuck in your vehicle?
Because wherever the storm is going, it's always our goal to get into the eye. And sometimes it's just not entirely possible to do that and stay safe. So that's kind of our big goal, is to stay safe, but also get into the eye of the storm and be near the biggest impacts.
And we're gonna have to ride it out right here. Hope we don't die. In the eye of Hurricane Ian, the wind dropped to probably 5 miles per hour. Another thing that was really interesting was pre-Hurricane Ian, where we were, had an offshore flow, so it actually sucked all of the water out of the harbor. So there was, places that had 6-8 foot of water typically had, it was mud or sand, because it had sucked all the water. Check out the pier over here to my left. You can walk all the way to the end of the pier underneath the bay here and see nothing but dirt, seashells, and mud. As soon as the eye came over, all the water rushed back into the bay, into the harbor, and so it almost looked like a river that was going backwards. You could just see it all rushing back in. All the sailboats that were out there that were kind of beached over on their side all like whoop, popped back up and started floating again. So that was kind of an interesting side of being in the eye. And then there's kind of the eerie side. The eye means you're halfway done. So you just endured, most likely, in most cases, the worst part of the hurricane, but you still have the entire back half of the hurricane left to go. And you don't really know what you're gonna encounter. And the winds are gonna be in a different direction this time. So everything that broke loose or was still semi-tied down is now going to take a very strong wind for 3 to 4 more hours in another direction. So imagine everything going from this way to now this way. Stuff tends to break free that wouldn't have broken free previously, that now becomes more things to watch out for.
Well, especially in Ian, because I mean, we were forecasting it, and I remember a couple of days before landfall, I made a comment to you. I was like, it looks like the moisture in Ian is kind of like stuck in the northern part of the storm. And typically, whenever we see really high moisture content in a certain part of a hurricane, it's usually on the south side coming northeast, and so the front half of the eye wall is a stronger part. But with Hurricane Ian, it was the opposite. So we get halfway through the storm, we're in the eye, it's calm, and I kind of knew in the back of my head, the second half of this is going to be stronger, which isn't typical, especially if you position yourself correctly to get into the eye. That's not typical. But with Hurricane Ian, it was stronger on the back half, which is a little bit anomalous.
It was definitely stronger. There was no doubt that the front half, we could actually, you could see, quarter, half mile in the heaviest part of the rain. In fact, we saw lightning and heard thunder. I've never seen lightning in a hurricane because you can't see anything. It's usually, they only form lightning in the eye wall. We're in the most intense part. Lightning is an indicator of rapid intensification. We've been in a few that had lightning in them, but we never saw the lightning, and the roar of the wind was always so loud that you couldn't hear the thunder. So you knew it was happening, there was nothing you couldn't see it or hear it. The front half of Ian, I saw multiple lightning strikes and heard the thunder that came behind with it, because the rain wasn't super intense and the winds were fairly gusty. So they weren't just, there was a roar of wind, but it was off and on. So it kind of had this different feeling about the front half. And in most hurricanes, that's the strongest side of the hurricane. So, and you tend to forget that when you're in the storm, right? So our default is, northwest quadrant, look out, that's the worst part, which is what we would just wrote out. And you forget all that model data that Frank was talking about, where the worst part is coming. It was much more intense on the backside. Rain that you could barely see past the hood of the truck while we were driving, flooding on the roads. The wind was easily at 140 miles an hour, which is, with the rain, is impossible. The roar of the wind was there. You couldn't hear or see anything. It was extremely intense, exactly what you thought. And then it lasted for hours. It was, came in at 2 o'clock, and I remember at 9 p.m., we're still stuck waiting on this wind to die down, thinking, hey, can we get back to a spot with a bed, and wondering if we're going to be able to do that or not. As we enter the eye of the hurricane and we're driving around in the eye, you start to look at some of the damage, still knowing that, we have this backside that we have indications that it's going to be more intense. But we start to see some of the damage, and then you start to realize that as this backside comes in, there's a whole nother level of danger that's about to come in with this hurricane that we hadn't seen yet. Our thoughts were confirmed very quickly, but I remember coming over out of Punta Gorda, Florida, across the harbor bridge, seeing the water rushing back into the bay and thinking, man, this could get pretty bad. Look at how fast this water is coming in. And then we see this hotel casino that's being constructed, and in the front half, the whole front side of this hotel casino had collapsed. and there were these massive cranes. There were 3 or 4 different cranes. 2 of them had already fallen on the building, and the other 2 were literally swinging around in the wind across the road. And we're thinking, we've got to get, our safe location is still, a couple of miles in front of us here as we're about to intercept the backside of this eye, and the wind is now beginning to increase. The rain is starting to fall again, and on radar, the storm looked more intense on the backside. It had a much wider eye wall path, like the width of the eye wall was just more intense looking. And we also noticed some reports of some really intense wind speeds that we didn't see when the front side came through. And so when you start to take in some of the ground truth that was coming in from other storm spotters and chasers in a few different locations, there was some ideas that this could get a little sketchy. And so, and it didn't take very long. I mean, there was no wind up period. It was 5 minutes, and we went from 5 to 10 mile per hour winds to blinding rain and 140 mile per hour winds that was throwing debris at our vehicle while we're driving through town. I mean, I think one of the craziest things outside of having a stoplight thrown at your windshield, a stoplight that's 3 foot tall. It's one of the hanging stoplights. So they're 3 foot tall, and they weigh almost 40 pounds. And it flew past our window like a pitcher throwing a baseball. I mean, just ripped right past our window. This wasn't a luck thing that it missed us. We were paying attention to the wind speed, and we shifted everything over and literally watched it go by, and then continued our path back to our safe location. But what was really interesting is in order to see, because it was raining so hard, the only way we could see where we were going, there were 2 things that I was having to use while I'm driving. Actually, I would say there were 3 things. So at times, the cameras would give us more visibility because of the contrast. Because it's almost like a whiteout, almost like being in a blizzard. The rain is coming down so hard. So the contrast from the cameras gave us the ability to see a few extra feet. Very, very helpful when you're driving down the road. In addition to that, you don't drive out the front windshield. I don't know if you guys remember, I was having to look out the side, and I was following the curb right next to the side of the truck. And that was the only way. Obviously, there's no traffic, so you don't have to worry about cars in front of you. You do have to worry about a roof or a stoplight or a telephone pole or things like that. But we're literally driving, looking out the side window. And the other thing that was a big concern was flooding, because now it is raining so hard. I mean, we're talking rainfall rates that are probably 4 to 5 inches per hour. I mean, it is dumping buckets of rain. So we're in Florida, where they have a lot of creeks and ponds and streams. And remember, we can't see more than the hood of the truck. So I can't see a creek or stream. I can't tell if the road is flooded out ahead of us. And so we're navigating with the curb as we're driving and the cameras to see a few feet. And then we have somebody on their phone with GPS maps to say there's a creek coming up.
And he was lucky he had that just enough to have the maps up and functioning. He was the only one that could do it. Everybody else's phones could not pull it up.
Mine wouldn't pull it up. Luckily, Matt's pulled it up. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't have known we were going. Like Derek said, you couldn't see anything. And I remember the moment when we started to be able to see absolutely nothing. It's the same intersection that the stoplight flew at us, and we were getting probably 110, I'd say at that point. It was like 4 minutes after the eye had passed, and there was almost like this wind shift. It's like this little blip of like where you just saw the wind turn a little bit, and we start to pull forward, and that's when the 140 mile an hour winds just slammed us. And that is the only chasing moment that I've ever had where I was like, whew, oh man. Because you can't see anything. So you have no idea if a stop sign's gonna plow through the side window of the truck. Like, you have no idea. And I mean, luckily there's cameras on the truck, so we were able to maneuver around, but like all of us, we couldn't see a single thing.
That was the only time that I've ever felt the need to say something to Derek about my discomfort in the moment. I'm pretty cool with most things. I don't complain. I don't get, scared very easily. That was the only time that I've ever been like, we need to move. We need to move right now. Like, you need to get me to a safe spot or you're gonna be dealing with my mom. So.
Okay. I'm not okay with this now. The lights are gonna fly. Whoa, what?
Storm surge wasn't a concern there, but it was the rain. And like, there were things in the road and you're like, oh, I hope we don't run over anything. I hope we don't pop a tire. Like, and it was, we were only like maybe 2 miles, less than 2 miles away from our safe spot. It was a good 20, 25 minutes of just crawling and just hoping that we're not gonna run over anything that's gonna make the truck, stop functioning. Like, I feel very safe in the truck. It's a tank. I felt very vulnerable for that half hour. It was very intense, very intense.
Did the Raptor sustain any damage during Hurricane Ian?
In Ian, the only thing we broke, our cell phone booster broke. And I don't know if the wind, so it's like an antenna that's on the roof of the truck and it's broken off and was just hanging off the side of it. I don't know if that was from high wind or if something hit it. And, there's no telling what actually caused that to break, but something knocked that loose. But we've lost GoPros.
Lost many a GoPro over the years, or they've gotten hit by not really hail, but rocks. Rocks will come up from the road and just crack them. Was it Ida where like the little weather thing on the back of the truck like got bent?
Oh yeah, that was Ida. The wind was so strong it bent. So we had an anemometer on the truck so we can measure the wind speed. And the wind was so strong it actually bent the pole over on the anemometer, so it didn't work anymore. And didn't work anymore ever again after that. But so we stopped taking those because they're pretty expensive.
How do hurricanes form and what purpose do they serve in nature?
The first thing that they do is they start out as a tropical wave, and there is a zone in the atmosphere where the trade winds where they merge together and they create lift, which creates a tropical wave. That tropical wave then comes across, and it's opposite of severe weather where we want lots of wind shear for severe weather. For hurricanes, we want 0. So we want the winds from the ground all the way up to be in the same direction and the same speed. And that allows that system, as those thunderstorms, as they brew over the warm water, we have to have very warm water. As they brew, they merge together, right? And they form this system. So they form this low pressure. And the stronger the thunderstorms get, the lower the pressure gets. And as that pressure drops, it forms into a tropical depression, which is winds of 35 miles per hour. Then it becomes a tropical storm, which is winds of 40 to 74 miles per hour. Then it becomes a hurricane, 74 mile per hour or greater winds sustained. And the stronger it gets, the more intense it gets. So hurricanes can go anywhere from a category 1 to a category 2 to what we consider a major hurricane, category 3. Hurricane Ian was a top end category 4 and almost the max level category 5 hurricane. And the purpose of these hurricanes is to take warm, moist air from the equator and transport it pole bound. So transport it up to the poles of the earth. So it's really just a balancing act of the earth to take warm air from here and transport it up here to keep everything as close to equal as possible.
What thoughts do you have now that we've reached the end of season 1 of Weather the Storm?
Final thoughts, the way that this year worked out, there were so many great things that we did, but the potential that we have for the upcoming year is just going to be amazing. I know, multiple chases. We had this idea of getting this shingle roof pulled out into a hailstorm, but really the difficulty of it's a split-second thing that we have to jump out and throw this thing out. But the way that it was built, we had to actually pitch the roof up, and it was a lot of work. It was very heavy. It was extremely hard to do in the amount of time that we had, and so it really limited our ability to be able to get these shots of the roof being impacted with significant hail. Well, after storm season's over, we go back to the drawing board and we discover that, hey, there's a better way to do this. So I'm really excited about having the roof built in a different way that allows us to get it into position to get massive hail on this Atlas roof. I cannot wait for people to see how well it performs. I think people are going to be shocked at what this shingle is able, the amount of impacts and the size of hail that it can take and still show no sign of damage. So I'm really excited to see that. I'm excited again about the potential that, you know, we've had a lot of slow storm seasons the last several years, and it's a matter of time. Weather works in waves. It comes and goes, just like the waves in the ocean, the swells in the ocean. The weather works a lot the same way. And so, and if you look back over the history of time, there are segments of time where in the plain states, we've had seasons where there weren't a lot of tornadoes and hailstorms. And I feel like with the amount of time that we've had this kind of, this exhale, this lack of severe weather, it's about to end. And 2023 could be that year. We know that we have this big change with the La Nina trying to shift now from the La Nina that we've been in the Pacific Ocean for the last several years, going to an El Nino now, potentially at the end of the spring. What does that change mean? Does that mean that that's a change in the pattern that we've had in the past? I'm excited to see what that means for season 2, what it means for the big storms that we have. And I'm excited to see what we're able to do because of what we learned this year shooting this show. Season 2, I am super excited about the biggest storms that we've ever seen.
Oh, power flashes.
The baddest hurricanes that we've ever chased, the largest tornadoes, most importantly, the hail size. I'm really excited about the hail size, and I'm excited about getting this Atlas roof into some of the biggest hail that we've ever been in.